Soft winds whispered across the courtyard as dawn's first light kissed the worn stone of the Red Keep. Sansa Stark, only just beginning to grow into the promise of womanhood, stood beside a window embrasure, fingers curling around the cool ledge. She had arrived in King's Landing with the hopeful excitement of a young girl raised on tales of gallant knights and honorable kings. All those illusions had been bruised by the capital's harsh realities. Yet, an astonishing twist of fate had reshaped her destiny. Instead of betrothal to Joffrey Baratheon, she was to wed Aegon Targaryen, a young man few had known existed until he came forward with his claim. She gazed at the brightening sky, her imagination spinning with 1,000 questions, her spirit still uncertain, half-formed, and yearning for a place to feel safe. She thought of her father, Lord Eddard Stark, whose honor and calm dignity had always guided her. He'd been uneasy about offering Sansa's hand to the Baratheons, but there had been no choice then. Duty was duty, and the Starks were not ones to flout the demands of crown and realm. But with Aegon Targaryen's sudden appearance, this rumored heir once whispered dead. Alliances shifted. A new future took shape, negotiated in hushed corridors by lords of cunning ambition. For a brief moment, Sansa had even dared feel hope. Perhaps Aegon would be kinder, gentler than the cruel and capricious Joffrey. Perhaps it wasn't all doom. Perhaps there could be love. But hope was an untrustworthy companion in King's Landing, fleeting as a sparrow's shadow on a sunny wall. Still, she clung to it, the way she clung to every romantic tale she'd devoured as a child in Winterfell. She took in a steadying breath. The air tasted of salt from Blackwater Bay, mingled with the pungent smell of the city, spices and sweat and wet cobblestones. Far below, she could see stonemasons hauling fresh blocks of marble to repair the damage the city had suffered in recent skirmishes. People of all sorts were thronging the streets, merchants hawking their wares, beggars clamoring for coin, noble ladies drifting by in finely woven silks. It was alive and chaotic, so different from the hushed, cold grandeur of the north. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the icy winds that whipped across the courtyard of Winterfell, or the scent of pine after fresh snowfall. She missed it fiercely, but the memory was slipping like snow melt through her fingers. A faint sound made her turn. Shafts of morning light fell on a tall figure entering the corridor. Lord Tyrion Lannister approached with cautious steps, wearing a look that was caught between curiosity and sympathy. "My lady," he greeted, polite as ever, though Sansa could sense the meticulous calculation behind his courtesy. She curtsied out of habit, but Tyrion gave a small, tight bow. "Might I have a word?" he asked. His eyes, mismatched in color but sharp with intelligence, flicked to the courtyard below, and then back to her. She knew he was aware of her circumstances, of how she'd been once promised to his nephew, Joffrey, and of how everything had changed in a matter of days. "Of course," she managed to say, tucking away her stray thoughts. His presence reminded her that trust was a precious commodity here. She had learned that swiftly after her father's downfall. Even in this new arrangement, everything felt precarious. One misstep, and she could lose everything. But she did not want to be meek forever. Some hidden part of her yearned to shape her own fate. "I wanted to see how you fared," Tyrion said quietly, stepping close enough so they wouldn't be overheard by curious guards. He wore doublet and hose in the rich Lannister crimson, a golden lion embroidered on his breast. Marrying a Targaryen comes with a host of complexities. She felt a flicker of apprehension. "Yes, I suppose it does," she said, not certain what else she could confide. Tyrion studied her face. He drew in a breath, an almost imperceptible hesitation. "It might be wise to make friends where you can," he advised. "Aegon is young, but they say he's been tempered by the adversity of exile. Perhaps he could be your ally." She noticed he didn't speak ill of Joffrey in her presence, perhaps out of familial loyalty, or perhaps he assumed she needed no reminder of how that boy could be. She forced a small, polite smile, uncertain whether Tyrion's words were genuine concern or some form of subtle manipulation. "I appreciate your counsel, my lord," she said, voice gentle. He nodded and was about to speak again, when the horns began to sound from outside, announcing the approach of royalty or some other high lord. A wave of tension passed through Sansa's body. The wedding was only a week away, and there had been so many ceremonies, so many formalities. It was a slow, elaborate tapestry of events, all arranged to showcase the returning Targaryen. With each passing day, she felt the threads of her life weaving into something new and untested. Tyrion bid her farewell and turned away. She watched his small form vanish into shadow. After a moment, she made her way through the corridors to the royal gardens, where she was to meet Aegon Targaryen himself. The young man had requested a stroll, a chance to become acquainted with the woman who would share his future. Each step she took sounded too loud in her ears, as if her pulse drummed through the stone beneath her feet. She told herself that she was not afraid, only anxious. This was no flippant matter. Yet, behind that anxiety, a faint, trembling spark of excitement flickered. What if this prince, this supposed Targaryen, proved gallant? What if he truly cared for her? She did not dare articulate that hope, but it glowed like an ember inside her chest. In the gardens, flowering trees spread their branches in gentle arcs, bright petals scattering across trimmed grass. A few rosebushes were in bloom, their fragrance dancing in the breeze. A stone bench stood near a fountain where water trickled merrily. She spotted him standing there, gazing at a cluster of blossoms, as though he'd never seen anything quite like them. Aegon Targaryen. He was of medium height, with a slender frame and refined features that hinted at Targaryen blood. His hair was a shade of silver gold, not as pale as Daenerys Targaryen's was rumored to be, but enough to suggest Valyrian heritage. As Sansa approached, he turned, revealing light violet eyes that were curious, reflecting a certain warmth that surprised her. She had expected him to appear imperious or haughty. Instead, he seemed watchful, almost thoughtful, as if observing the world with fresh wonder. "My lady," he greeted, executing a courteous bow. The formal gesture might have been stiff in the presence of others, but here, in the secluded garden, it held a softness that disarmed her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Sansa's heart fluttered. She lowered her eyes in a brief courtesy. "Thank you for inviting me." She felt almost foolish at how quiet her voice was. Gone were the practiced lines she'd rehearsed in her head. The sight of him, so earnest, so unexpectedly mild, upended all her expectations. She had seen glimpses of him from a distance. Of course, at feasts and ceremonies, but never so close. She searched for any trace of cruelty on his features and found none. They settled onto the stone bench. For a few moments, neither spoke. The only sound, the gentle gurgle of the fountain, the rustling of leaves overhead. Sansa had lived most of her life in a place of snow and gray skies. So this sunlit garden was both enchanting and foreign. Aegon leaned forward, hands clasped. She noticed slight calluses on his fingers. He did not wear the ring and sigil of House Targaryen in an ostentatious display. His attire was subdued, even humble for a prince claiming the Iron Throne. There was, however, a faint strain in his expression, as though he carried burdens well beyond his years. "It must be strange for you," he said at last, voice low and steady. "To be brought here under one arrangement, only to have it changed so drastically." She swallowed. Yes, it is strange. She wondered if he would ask about Joffrey, or about her father's fate, or about her experiences in King's Landing. But he did not. Instead, he turned his gaze upon the roses. "I was raised far from these courts," he said. "I was taught to be wary of illusions and to keep my truths close. When the time came for me to stake my claim to the throne, those I trusted told me it was a necessary duty. But I'm not blind. I know how alliances shift, how promises can be bartered. Your hand in marriage is part of that, and I would prefer you not resent me for it." Menda compressed. Something in his candor broke open a delicate part of her heart. The old Sansa, naive to the ways of ambition, might have doubted such sincerity. But the experiences here had begun to teach her to read the truth behind well-crafted masks. She dared to look at him. "I don't resent you," she said. "I only fear what I don't know." He paused, studying her. "Then perhaps we can come to know each other, bit by bit." He offered a small, hesitant smile. "I would like that." She felt a faint heat in her cheeks. "I would like that too." For a while, they spoke in gentle turns, drifting through unthreatening topics. Her memories of Winterfell, his experiences with tutors who taught him about the Seven Kingdoms from across the narrow sea. He told her of ancient texts filled with dragon lore, and how he yearned for a history that felt truly his, rather than something borrowed. She told him of the crypts of Winterfell, how each time she descended the cold steps she felt the presence of her ancestors looming in the darkness. Words passed between them like cautious raindrops, each seeking to find fertile ground. The sun moved overhead, and the garden's shadows shifted. At last, a pair of attendants approached, reminding Aegon of a council meeting. He stood, bowed again, and gently took Sansa's hand. He pressed it in a gesture of reverence, as though she were a figure from a ballad. Then he left, and the world felt strangely emptier. She rose and wandered the paths alone. Her thoughts spun. Could this union be something other than a political snare? She hardly dared trust it. Yet Aegon's eyes had shone with an earnest light she had never seen in Joffrey's. A small, breathless part of her wanted desperately to believe him. She might have lingered longer in the garden had not the creeping day demanded she fulfill her own obligations. There were septas waiting to instruct her on the vow ceremonies, tailors and seamstresses requesting her presence for further wedding gown fittings. Sansa drifted into those responsibilities, letting the day's tasks swallow her doubts for a time. Word of the coming wedding spread throughout the city, stirring curiosity and excitement. The common folk whispered tales of Targaryen restorations, uncertain whether to fear or celebrate. In the Red Keep's halls, lords and ladies kept watchful gazes on Sansa and Aegon, trying to measure how their union would shift the power balance. Cersei Lannister was often seen gliding through corridors, with an expression of carefully veiled disdain. She had been queen once, and likely still thought of herself in that light. Now, she had to endure the spectacle of another royal line threatening her family's hold. Sansa could feel Cersei's green eyes follow her from a distance. Never quite overtly hostile, but always tinged with that cunning watchfulness that had haunted Sansa's nightmares. As the days crept closer to the wedding, each dawn brought more elaborate customs. Minstrels arrived, ballads were rehearsed, and the great hall was adorned with tapestries bearing both the Stark direwolf and the Targaryen dragon entwined in artful symbolism. People gossiped about whether dragons might soon fill the skies again. They wondered if the North would become newly powerful, allied as it was now with the Targaryen. Others questioned whether Aegon's claim was legitimate. Rumors had a life of their own, swirling in corners like caged birds, each day producing new and more outlandish speculations. Sansa performed her duties with grace, but her inner world churned with uneasy anticipation. Every night, she sat in her chambers, brushing out her hair, listening to the distant cries of gulls and remembering Winterfell. Sometimes she would catch her reflection in the polished metal mirror, wearing an expression she barely recognized. When she was a young girl, she had prayed to the old gods for a fair and chivalrous prince to sweep her away. She had prayed for songs and love. In a crooked way, might these prayers be coming true? Or was she about to be ensnared in yet another web, tethered to powers far beyond her control? A day before the wedding, a small betrothal feast was held in a private garden courtyard. Only those of particular rank were invited. Sansa arrived wearing a dress of deep blue, her hair pinned with delicate silver ornaments in the shape of dragon wings. The hush that fell when she entered made her anxious. She forced a polite smile as she moved among the crowd. Lords bowed, ladies curtsied, some with genuine courtesy, others with forced politeness. She spotted her mother, Catelyn Stark, across the courtyard, speaking in low tones with her uncle Brynden Tully. The sight of her mother gave Sansa a momentary surge of comfort. Catelyn wore her own tension in a tight set of her lips, but her eyes softened when she noticed Sansa. Even across the distance, it was as if she were reassuring Sansa that she was not alone in this precarious arrangement. Aegon waited for her near a modest table piled with fresh bread, fruit, and wine. He was dressed in black, accented with red, Targaryen colors that complemented his pale hair. When she approached, he offered her his arm. She placed her hand upon it gently, feeling the firmness of his muscles beneath the fabric. A flurry of toasts followed, from lords eager to align themselves with a Targaryen king, from those who had placed wagers on the success of this new alliance. The atmosphere glimmered with hope, though behind the bright smiles lurked the perpetual tension of King's Landing's politicking. When the feasting began, Aegon guided Sansa to a quiet corner table that had been arranged for them. Servants brought plates of roast duck, lemon cakes, spiced wine. Sansa noticed he barely touched his food, seeming more interested in conversation. "I know this must all be overwhelming," he said softly. "It is for me too. Sometimes I feel like the world turned upside down the moment I stepped onto these shores." She dabbed her lips with a napkin. "I understand. She paused. "I don't know if you can truly want this throne for yourself, or if it's something forced upon you. But I can see it weighs on you." A faint shadow crossed his face. "It was my father's legacy. My right, if the stories hold true. But yes, I confess there are days I wonder what life might be if I were free of such burdens." His gaze drifted across the courtyard, resting on the other nobles. Then he looked at her. "But here we are. At least we can try to face it together." The warmth in his eyes drew her in. She recalled the times Joffrey would sneer at her, taunt her, or inflict petty cruelties. Aegon's kindness felt like a balm. She bowed her head slightly. "I would like that," she murmured, echoing the words she'd spoken in the garden days ago. He reached out, tentatively brushing a stray curl from her forehead. The gesture was intimate, and for a moment, she blushed. Around them, the festival music played softly, and conversations rose and fell in a gentle tide. The tension of the capital was momentarily soothed by the promise of new alliances. She knew her mother watched from across the space, perhaps with a trace of worry, but also with pride that her eldest daughter was conducting herself well in such a fraught environment. The evening wore on with the languid pace of a dream. Courtiers danced, swirling their silken skirts. Lanterns were lit in the courtyard, casting flickering illuminations on the walls. When the final notes of music faded, and the guests began to disperse, Sansa felt a strange pang, part excitement, part dread. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow, her entire life would change once again. She and Aegon parted with lingering smiles, stepping away from the courtyard to retire to separate chambers, each weighed down by the magnitude of what dawn would bring. That night, she could not sleep. She stood by the narrow window in her bedchamber, staring into the city below. The glimmer of distant torches merged with starlight. She felt the hush of midnight pressing against the walls. In her mind's eye, she pictured tomorrow's ceremony. The hush in the sept, the soft glow of candles, the high lords arrayed in their finery, and the vows that would tie her to House Targaryen. She pictured Aegon standing beside her, the press of his hand around hers. She allowed herself a small breath of hope that perhaps this union might not be so terrible. The future was a precarious thing, but for one quiet moment, she gave herself permission to believe in something better. Dawn arrived in a swirl of activity. Septus and maids rushed in and out of her chamber, helping her prepare. The wedding gown had been finished with elaborate touches, a gentle melding of Stark and Targaryen motifs. The bodice was of silver white, like Winterfell's snowy landscapes, embroidered with subtle threads of gray that formed a wolf's head. The skirt transitioned into black and red, with a faint pattern of dragon scales near the hem. Pearls dotted the sleeves, catching the morning light. Sansa felt like she was floating as they combed her hair, pinning it with small crystal droplets that shimmered like tears. She hardly recognized the regal figure in the mirror, but there she was, and her heart pounded with every beat. Her mother arrived, dressed in a rich Tully blue, her expression composed but maternal concern evident in her eyes. They embraced. Sansa wished desperately for her father's presence, for Arya's mischievous grin, for Robb's jokes to lighten her spirits. But only her mother was here, and that was more than many had in such a place. Catelyn placed a hand on Sansa's cheek. "You are so beautiful, my darling girl," she whispered. "And you are strong. Remember that." "Dawn?" Sansa nodded, feeling tears threaten. She swallowed them, not wanting to smudge any of the careful cosmetics that had been applied. Then, before she knew it, they were leading her toward the royal sept. The corridors seemed endless. She heard the rhythmic chant of the silent sisters passing in the distance, the shuffle of well-dressed lords and ladies as they took their places within the sept's pews. High Sparrow, or no High Sparrow. The wedding of a Targaryen claimant was an event, and the city's great houses turned out in force. At the sept's threshold, she caught sight of the high ceiling, the colored glass windows casting prisms of light onto the stone floor. She kept her gaze forward as her mother guided her. A hush fell as she entered, her dress trailing behind her in a shimmer of silver, black, and red. Attendants on each side stood like statues, their faces awash with curiosity. Candlelight flickered off polished pillars, and the air smelled of incense and myrrh. And there, at the altar, stood Aegon, dressed in finely tailored black with subtle crimson embroidery. His hair glowed almost white in the candlelight, and as he watched her approach, his expression was transfixed, equal parts solemnity and awe. Behind him, in carefully arranged seats, were key figures of the realm. Sansa registered them without letting her focus waver. Tyrion Lannister with his keen stare, Varys with folded hands, her mother's tense posture, and in a place of prominence, Queen Cersei Lannister, perched with the faintest of forced smiles. Further behind, lords from all corners. This moment was not just a wedding, it was a cornerstone of the kingdom's future. Step by measured step, Sansa arrived at Aegon's side. She managed one steady inhale, telling herself not to tremble too obviously. The Septon began the ceremony, speaking the ancient words that had bound nobles together for generations. Sansa barely heard them, her heart pounding like a war drum. She glanced at Aegon, noticing the subtle motion of his throat as he swallowed, and the reassuring warmth in his eyes. When the time came for them to speak their vows, her voice sounded distant in her own ears, yet she managed to keep it steady. Aegon's vow was spoken gently but firmly. Each word, rung out through the hush, seemed to settle into Sansa's mind like stones in a mosaic, forming a pattern of something that could be real and safe. When the Septon pronounced them man and wife, there was a rush of sound, a swell of applause, a surge of the strings and flutes playing. Aegon turned to Sansa and carefully lifted the delicate wedding veil from her face. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, and then he leaned in, pressing the lightest of kisses on her lips. She felt his breath, the faint taste of orchard fruit from the feast the night before, the softness of his mouth. It was both too brief and impossibly long, and her heart fluttered like a caged bird. The crowd roared its approval. They exited the sept side by side, stepping out into the bright day as newlyweds. The courtyard beyond was festooned with ribbons and banners. Minstrels stood ready, launching into joyous tunes as soon as they emerged. Sansa blinked in the sunshine, momentarily overwhelmed. Aegon squeezed her hand lightly, and she managed a small smile in return. The tension in her chest eased a fraction. A lavish feast followed, with tables groaning under the weight of roasted boar, delicate pastries, and casks of wine from the arbor. The great hall was transformed into a spectacle of color and music. Jesters tumbled and knights toasted. Sansa and Aegon sat at the high table, presiding over the festivities. More and more, her eyes sought his. They exchanged small smiles, quiet remarks. She discovered he had a dry humor, an ironic twist to some of his observations. When a group of lordlings became too rowdy with their cups, Aegon leaned in and whispered a playful joke to her, one that made her stifle a laugh behind her napkin. He looked as if he too was nearly undone by the oddity of so many eyes upon them. As the night deepened, torches were lit, illuminating the swirling dancers on the floor. Each moment stretched, thick with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. She felt an unfamiliar, exquisite tension. Weddings in Westeros did not end with feasting. There was the bedding ceremony, a tradition Sansa had always found embarrassing to imagine. She also knew, with a dread-laced thrill, that tonight marked the consummation of their union. The thought of that closeness, that intimacy with a man she'd only just begun to know, sent her heart racing. Still, amid her nerves, she felt a flutter of curiosity. What would it be like to share whispers in the dark, to feel his warmth and perhaps discover some measure of kindness there? The call for the bedding ceremony came, as it always did. Lords and ladies cheered in raucous delight, surging forward to separate bride and groom. Sansa braced herself, cheeks burning, but Aegon's hand remained steady on hers until the last possible moment. They were pulled apart in a swirl of laughter and bawdy jokes. Servants guided her to the wedding chamber, draping her in a cloak of winter-white fur. She felt hands tugging gently at her dress, removing pins and ornaments. Nervousness twisted in her stomach. She clutched the cloak around her shoulders, feeling the press of excitement and fear in equal measure. When the final guard closed the door, leaving her alone in a chamber warmed by a low fire and lit by dozens of candles, Sansa took stock of her surroundings. Softly woven carpets underfoot, a wide bed strewn with fresh linens, the dancing glow of flames casting shadows on the wall. She drew in a breath and almost jumped when the door opened again, revealing Aegon. He entered quietly, eyes finding hers in the candlelight. He wore only a loose shirt and breeches, the flush in his cheeks suggesting he was as aware of the moment's weight as she. Carefully, he turned the lock. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all the spectacle. I know how embarrassing it can be." She let out a trembling laugh. "It's tradition," she said, uncertain of what else to utter. Her heart pounded. For a moment, they simply faced each other across the small space, neither moving, the roar of the feast continuing faintly beyond the walls. Then tentatively, Aegon approached. He touched her cloak, pushing the heavy fur aside so he could see her face. She felt his gaze slide across her features. Nervousness fluttered in her throat. "You look beautiful," he said, voice hushed. "I don't wish to rush you into anything. This marriage, it's new to both of us. But the realm expects." He trailed off, unable to finish the obvious statement. She nodded, not trusting her voice. She thought of the romantic songs she devoured in childhood, of how they described this moment as a swirl of passion and destiny. In truth, it was rawer, more human, trembling with vulnerability. Yet, she felt no fear of him, only a shy readiness to take the next step. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. "We can go slowly," she murmured. His smile was faint but real. Tension eased slightly in his shoulders. With trembling fingers, he began to undo her gown's fastenings, each movement careful and deliberate. She felt the brush of his knuckles against her skin. The candlelight flickered on the planes of his face, showing apprehension and a gentle desire. Step by step, they navigated the uncertain territory between them. Finally, when the last layer of fabric slipped to the floor, Sansa let the cloak drop from her shoulders, and she stood before him in her shift. She could hardly breathe, her cheeks aflame. He lifted his hand, letting it hover near her cheek, as if silently asking permission. She nodded, and he stroked her skin with the backs of his fingers. The softness of the gesture coaxed her closer, and she felt something shift in her chest. An opening, a promise. They moved as if in a dream, drawn together by the hush of candlelight, by the gravity of the vows they had spoken, by the fragile hope that maybe this union could bring more than just politics. Their lips met in a kiss, gentle at first, then slowly deepening. She felt a rush of warmth radiate from her stomach outward. In that moment, she let herself believe that perhaps she could find a tender corner in this new life. They took their time, exploring each other's presence with cautious hands and searching mouths. The bed's edge soon pressed against the backs of her legs, and she felt the covers yield as they sank down. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. A swirl of breath, whispers, and hushed touches followed, the final barrier of clothing slipping away. Under the glow of the fire, with the faint strains of celebration drifting through the walls, they consummated their vows. It was awkward, and it was sweet, and she was glad it was with him, and not with the cruel boy she had once been promised to. After, they lay side by side, the sheets tangled around their limbs, a sheen of perspiration on their skin. Aegon's breath was still uneven as he turned his head to watch her. She let her fingers rest lightly on his chest, feeling the thump of his heart beneath her palm. Her own body vibrated with leftover nervousness, but she also felt an unmistakable sense of relief. Whatever fate might bring, they'd taken a step towards something that might one day be called companionship, perhaps even affection. She closed her eyes. Sleep came, fitful at first. She drifted in and out of half-formed dreams. Wolves howling in snowy forests, dragons soaring through a star-filled sky, a light wind stirring the leaves in a sunlit garden. Each scene blended into the next, as if weaving the tapestry of two houses coming together. In the hush before dawn, she awoke to find Aegon's arms around her, his head nestled against her shoulder. The warmth of his body was comforting, banishing the old nightmares of King's Landing cruelty. She lay there, eyes on the faint glow of the candle, listening to his soft breathing. The marriage had begun. When morning finally arrived, they rose to greet the day, both uncertain of how to behave. In the presence of servants, they assumed a regal composure, allowing themselves to be dressed in splendid robes. The wedding night would be the talk of the court, she knew. She felt the faint burn of embarrassment, but she also felt stronger, more anchored than the day before. As they stepped from their chamber together, hand in hand, the hush of the corridor gave way to the swirl of courtiers awaiting them, each eager for the next phase of this new reign. Sansa's spine straightened. She glanced at Aegon, who offered the faintest reassuring squeeze of her fingers, and she thought, perhaps the songs she loved so dearly might yet find a life here. Or perhaps a new song would be written, one that belonged to both of them. A merging of wolf and dragon, forging a path uncharted in the annals of Westeros. Whatever might come, betrayal, war, triumph, their story had begun. Amid the shifting alliances and tangled power plays of King's Landing, they stood at the dawn of a marriage that could reshape the realm. With each step through the halls, where the eyes of courtiers and spies lingered on them, Sansa felt a subtle shift. She was no longer just a frightened girl from the north, nor was she a pawn meant to be bartered away. She was Sansa Targaryen now, wife to a prince forging his claim, and there would be no turning back from the path that had been set. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt the pulse of possibility thrumming in her veins, as sweet and simple as a single note of music that might swell into an anthem worthy of the old songs. Kei. Each passing day brought a reminder that the city belonged to him now, and therefore, to her. The very morning after the bedding, Sansa found herself learning to wear authority in small, careful increments. She woke to the muted call of gulls over the bay, her body still adjusting to the softness of his warmth beside her. Dawnlight slipped through the half-drawn curtains, illuminating the carved posts of the large bed. For a moment, she watched Aegon's sleeping profile. The subtle rise and fall of his chest, the faint furrow between his brows that lingered even in slumber. Something delicate stirred in her, a lingering tenderness from the night before. She reached out, lightly grazing his bare shoulder with the tips of her fingers, marveling at the reality of him. Soon, courtly duties beckoned. Servants arrived, discreet and silent, to help them dress. They bowed and curtsied more deeply than before, a sign of the reverence now owed to their newly anointed pair. Sansa felt her cheeks warm under such deference, unused to it despite her upbringing as a lord's daughter. Aegon, too, seemed wary of allowing them to fuss over him. She caught the flicker of discomfort in his eyes as they laid out his ornate black tunic, embroidered with the Targaryen three-headed dragon in deep red thread. He dismissed the servant sooner than they expected, pulling Sansa aside so they could share a hushed moment. She felt the brush of his lips against her temple, a gentle reassurance that whatever it was they faced, they would face it together. They stepped into the corridor hand in hand, and the hush that fell over the guards was immediate. Wordless bows, silent respect. Aegon inclined his head in acknowledgement, and Sansa tried to remember every lesson in posture her mother had taught her. Her slippers glided over polished floors as they moved toward the great hall. Today, they would appear before the court for a formal blessing of their union, a ceremony that seemed redundant but necessary to display the new power dynamic. As they reached the threshold, a steward called out their names in a ringing voice. The echoes hung in the air, and suddenly they were at the top of the dais where two high-backed chairs waited. Sansa recognized them, the seat of the king and queen, though the Iron Throne itself loomed behind, that monstrous edifice of fused swords and jagged edges. They were to sit at a smaller dais in front of it for now, a subtle acknowledgement that Aegon's claim still required the realm's acceptance. The hush extended through the great hall, broken only by the rustle of silks and the shifting of mail. Aegon led her forward, offering his arm. Sansa held on to him, careful to keep her expression poised, aware that hundreds of eyes were upon her, analyzing her every glance and breath. They settled into the chairs, and the High Septon approached, reciting the lines that confirmed their sacred union and blessed the realm for its new hope. Incense smoked upward, curling in hazy ribbons. Aegon's hand twitched slightly against the carved arm of his seat. Sansa wondered if he felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. She remembered the songs of old Targaryen kings, of dragons roaring in the skies, of the might and terror of that lineage. This slender young man beside her bore the weight of all that history, and he bore it with a quiet determination that both moved and alarmed her. When the ceremony ended, a murmur rippled through the crowd. At first, no one stepped forward, uncertain whether to approach the dais without explicit command. The hush dragged on until Tyrion Lannister emerged from among the lords gathered. His mismatched gaze flicked from Aegon to Sansa, and he dropped into a respectful bow. "Your Grace," he said to Aegon. "And your Grace," turning to Sansa. His courtesy was flawlessly measured, voice pitched to carry just enough but no more. "If it pleases you, I have arranged a gathering of the small council to discuss matters of the crown." Aegon nodded. "It pleases us." His voice had a tremor of command, though Sansa detected an undercurrent of caution. Tyrion turned to beckon a handful of other nobles, beckoning them to follow to the council chamber. Aegon rose, offering Sansa his hand, and she accepted, letting him lead her from the dais. As they exited, she felt a sense of relief that she no longer needed to sit beneath so many watchful gazes. Before she could fully compose herself, Cersei Lannister, tall and poised in shimmering green satin, stepped into their path. The Queen Mother's golden hair was arranged in a carefully wrought cascade. She inclined her head in stiff politeness. "Your Graces," she said, the corners of her mouth curling with the faintest suggestion of a smile. Her voice was rich, each syllable turned over with poised smoothness. "Allow me to offer my congratulations on your wedding. May the Seven grant you long life and many heirs." Her gaze lingered on Sansa as she pronounced the final words. Sansa inclined her head in return, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. Cersei's presence still unnerved her. Memories flickered. The Queen's cold stares, her cunning remarks, the terror Sansa had lived under while betrothed to Joffrey. "Thank you, Your Grace," Sansa responded softly, willing her voice not to tremble. She was queen now too, even if only in name for the moment. But she could not forget that Cersei knew all the secrets of this court as intimately as a spider in its web. Cersei's eyes grazed over Aegon, then returned to Sansa. "Our realm has a new dawn," she said softly. "I trust you will both bring it prosperity." With that, she stepped aside, allowing them to pass. But the echo of her words clung in the air, a subtle reminder that power never yielded so easily in King's Landing. Sansa did not let her breath out until she was sure Cersei was behind them. At last, they slipped into the small council chamber, a more modest space with a long table of dark oak. The walls were lined with books and charts depicting various regions of Westeros. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dancing across the polished table. Here, the higher lords who claimed allegiance to Aegon had gathered. Men with cunning intellect and ambition. Men who had wagered on the Targaryen restoration. Lady Margaery Tyrell was also in attendance. The Tyrells were skilled at forging advantageous alliances, and they had promptly sent her as an envoy, though Joffrey's prior betrothal to Margaery complicated matters. She stood, offering a graceful curtsy, her brown curls bouncing lightly. Sansa felt a mixture of sympathy and relief that she no longer had to endure Joffrey's cruelty, but Margaery's own ambitions were not to be underestimated. They traded polite smiles before Aegon gestured for everyone to be seated. Tyrion cleared his throat. "Your Grace, if I may begin?" He waited for Aegon's nod. "We have received word from various parts of the realm. The North, unsurprisingly, shows strong support for this union, given that the Starks have long been respected by their bannermen. The Riverlands are more divided. House Frey and House Tully have their own priorities, though Lady Catelyn's presence here may help sway them. As for the Stormlands, their allegiance to the Baratheons wavers. Renly Baratheon was once beloved there. He paused for breath. Most pressing, however, are the concerns about the crown's debts to the Iron Bank of Bravos. We must address that swiftly if we are to maintain trade routes and stable coin. At the mention of debts, Sansa suppressed a slight shiver. She knew little of such matters beyond the typical lessons a lady might receive in estate management. But this was a realm's treasury, not a household's. She watched Aegon's reaction, wondering if he'd had the chance to prepare for such complexities. He appeared measured, hands folded before him. "What would you advise, Lord Tyrion?" Tyrion surveyed those gathered, as if measuring each for their reaction. "We must send envoys to treat with the Iron Bank, of course. Perhaps Mace Tyrell would be willing to extend a loan to the crown to show good faith. Or we renegotiate the existing debts with terms favorable to your new reign." Margaery, ever poised, lifted her chin. "My father is eager to support King Aegon's administration, of course. But we must ensure the gold flows both ways. The Reach has had a bountiful harvest, so resources are ample. If the crown will acknowledge certain trade privileges for House Tyrell." Aegon nodded carefully, glancing at Sansa. She offered a small smile of encouragement. He turned back to the Tyrell lady. "We will make sure your father is rewarded for his assistance. Let us discuss the details after the council." With fewer ears present, Margaery inclined her head, satisfied with the promise. Tyrion made a subtle note on a scrap of parchment. Other lords raised concerns about bandits on the Gold Road, the possibility of Ironborn raids along the western coasts, and rumors of tensions in Dorne. Through it all, Sansa listened quietly, absorbing the scale of the realm's burdens. She realized how tenuous everything was. A single spark could set off a war. A single miscalculation could bring the new monarchy tumbling down. At length, the council concluded. Aegon rose, commanding attention with a glance. "Thank you for your counsel. We shall reconvene in 2 days to discuss specifics. In the meantime, do what you can to calm these tensions and ensure the crown's interests are represented." The lords rose, bowing or curtsying. A flurry of robes and hushed conversation swept them out of the chamber. Tyrion lingered by the door, waiting for a moment when Sansa and Aegon had a measure of privacy. Aegon exhaled, looking toward his queen. "That went better than I feared," he admitted. "But I can't help wondering how much of their courtesy was genuine and how much was performance." "They are eager to please now," Tyrion chimed in, "but do not mistake that for loyalty. Each house invests in whatever path promises them the greatest gain. Royal favor can vanish as quickly as a summer storm." "Nimnimo." Sansa nodded. "We have to be cautious." They lapsed into silence. Tyrion studied them both, as though weighing the next words he might speak. Finally, he said, "I truly hope the alliance between House Stark and House Targaryen endures. A long period of peace would benefit all, and the realm is weary of war. But if you need counsel, and perhaps a cunning mind to see through courtiers' flattery, my door is open." With that, he withdrew, leaving them alone in the dimming midday light. Aegon turned to her, eyes flicking over her face. She offered a tentative smile. He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Shall we walk for a moment?" he asked. "I'd like a breath of air." She agreed, and they left the small council chamber, exiting through a side door that opened onto a balcony overlooking the city. The vantage point took in the tangled streets, the tiled rooftops, and beyond them, the shimmering waters of Blackwater Bay. Sansa inhaled, letting the breeze ruffle her hair. Far below, the daily life of King's Landing continued. Vendors hawking fruit, ragged children running errands, the clatter of wagon wheels. She gazed at it all, remembering how she used to view this city as the grand stage of all romance and honor. It had taught her otherwise. Yet perhaps with Aegon's reign, it could become something better. He leaned against the stone railing, shoulders slumping slightly now that they had a moment's reprieve from the eyes of lords and ladies. "I hope I didn't seem uncertain in there," he said, pressing his lips together. "I've trained for this my entire life, yet it feels strange now that it's real." She reached to rest a hand on his arm. "You did well. You spoke with calm authority. People respond to that." She hesitated before adding, "I see them watching you, measuring your every move, just as they watch me. Perhaps we can share that burden if you'd let me." Nah. He turned his gaze toward her, a flash of gratitude in his eyes. "I would welcome your help. I know your father was an honorable man, and that you Starks carry loyalty and wisdom. I want to do right by this realm." For a moment, he paused. "And by you." A gentle heat pooled beneath her ribs, a sense of closeness that was still so unfamiliar. She curled her fingers gently against his, and they stood there in silence for a time, letting the wind weave around them, letting the city sprawl below. In that hush, she realized how much had changed. Once, she stood in terror, betrothed to Joffrey, every day a dreadful uncertainty. Now, she felt a cautious optimism that her husband might genuinely care. Perhaps, in time, they would grow to love each other in truth. The notion made her heart flutter. By the evening, the castle had resumed its hum of daily life. Servants bustled about with trays of spiced wine, marinated olives, and warm bread. Sansa left Aegon to attend to a meeting with a group of Stormland's bannermen. Instead, she walked alone to visit her mother, who was residing in a suite of guest chambers near the royal quarters. On her way, she found herself navigating corridors that still felt like a labyrinth. Guards in Targaryen livery patrolled, their newly sewn crests half familiar. She had a momentary pang, remembering the dire wolf banners that once hung at Winterfell, and the comfortable chill of the north. She was home in none of these halls, yet she was expected to be queen of them. A soft rap on her mother's door, and Catelyn Stark opened it. At once, the stern lines of Lady Catelyn's face eased into relief. "My sweet girl," she murmured, ushering Sansa inside. The room was modest compared to the grand suite Sansa shared with Aegon, but it held a certain warmth. A small fire crackled in the hearth, and a worn tapestry of some southern hunt brightened the walls. Sansa felt her shoulders relax as the door shut. "How are you, mother?" Sansa asked, settling onto a wooden chair cushioned with wool. She was reminded of quieter days in Winterfell, where she and her mother would share a pot of tea, discussing needlework or the doings of her younger siblings. How distant all that seemed now. Catelyn studied her with eyes that held both pride and worry. "I'm well enough, though the city can feel stifling. I long for the open air of the north, but I must remain here for the time being to support you." Sansa's throat tightened. "I miss it as well," she admitted, voice trembling just enough that her mother noticed. "But I want this to work. Aegon is kind, I think. He might be a good king if the realm gives him a chance. And if he has the right guidance." Catelyn pressed a hand over Sansa's. "I hope that's true. House Stark has tied its future to House Targaryen now. The lords of the north look to us, and to you, to ensure their voices are heard. They have never forgotten the horrors of war, especially not after what happened to your father." Her voice faltered on the last words. Both of them lapsed into silence, remembering Ned Stark, whose honorable heart had led him to a lonely execution in this very city. Sansa felt her eyes sting, but she blinked back the tears. She would cry later, perhaps, in the stillness of night, with only the shadows for company. Instead, she squared her shoulders as her mother would. "I won't let Father's legacy be in vain," she said softly. "We'll find a way to keep the peace." Catelyn nodded, her expression resolute. "I will stand by you in that cause." She hesitated a moment. "And what of the Lannisters, Sansa? Have they given any sign they'll cause trouble? Tywin Lannister is dead, but the rest remain powerful. Joffrey still lurks somewhere in Cersei's mind. He's king in name, at least by the prior decree. I know the city calls Aegon the rightful heir, but I worry about the sword that hasn't been drawn yet." Sansa ran a hand over her skirt, recalling the tension in Cersei's voice. "I don't trust them, but so far no open hostility. That doesn't mean we can relax. If Joffrey or Tommen appear, or if Cersei stirs up old loyalists, we have to be prepared." Catelyn squeezed Sansa's hand. "Be careful, daughter. You have a strong mind and a gentle heart. Don't let them see too much of your fear." They shared a quiet moment, holding each other's gaze, each weighing the dangers still prowling the corridors of power. At last, Sansa stood, pressing a kiss to her mother's cheek. "I'll do what I must," she whispered. Catelyn nodded, her face a mask of steely resolve. Sansa slipped out of the chamber, making her way back toward her own rooms. Her path took her by a secluded gallery that overlooked the training yard. A handful of knights sparred with blunted steel, their grunts echoing in the warm evening air. She stopped for a moment, watching them practice the forms of swordsmanship, the clang of metal a steady counterpoint to her thoughts. She had once believed knights were the epitome of honor and romance. The illusions had shattered long ago. Yet a part of her still admired the elegance of a well-trained fighter moving with precision. She leaned on the railing, letting the monotony of the sword strikes lull her restless mind. Without warning, a presence materialized behind her. She turned to see Prince Oberyn Martell, famous for his cunning and skill with a spear, as well as his passionate temperament, watching her with a quirk of a smile. She hadn't realized he was in the city, but apparently, emissaries from Dorne had arrived in the wake of Aegon's coronation claims. Oberyn bowed, but his grin was roguish. "My Lady Queen," he said, voice rich with accent. "Or should I call you my Queen Lady? Forgive me, I am still uncertain of how to address you in this new order." Sansa offered a small, polite incline of her head. "Prince Oberyn, your presence is welcome." She recalled that the Martells had a storied history with the Targaryens, one full of alliances, but also vendettas. "I trust you find the city well?" He shrugged, leaning beside her on the railing. "The city is never well. It reeks of ambition and sewage. But I come for the sake of Dorne. My brother, Prince Doran, wishes to see if the Targaryen claims might bring us a new age of cooperation, or an excuse for yet another war." His gaze flicked to her ring, the band of silver filigree encircling her finger, marking her as Aegon's wife. "And you, Lady Sansa. They say you have the spirit of the wolf in you, that you survived many trials here under the Lannisters. I'm curious to see how you fare now." She tilted her head, unsettled by his directness. "I fare as one must in the capital," she replied, measured. "I trust you bring no ill will toward House Targaryen. I know your house has had its share of grief over the years." A flicker of darkness passed behind Oberyn's eyes. "Elia was my sister," he said quietly, "taken from us in Robert's rebellion, and our grievances with the Lannisters run deep. But for the true Targaryen line, we once fought alongside them, even married into them. The future is uncertain, but I will not let the sins of the past shackle me. In Dorne, we repay blood with blood, yet we also honor pacts. I'm here to see if Aegon is truly who he claims to be, if he has a worthy heart beneath that dragon banner. And I must say, seeing him wed a Stark intrigues me." "Namsity." Sansa tried not to squirm under his scrutiny. "I hope to prove worthy of your interest, Prince Oberyn." He smiled then, a sudden flash of warmth. "Oh, I have no doubt you will. The vipers of Dorne are not easily deterred, my queen, so do not be alarmed if we watch you closely." Then he straightened. "I should not linger. I merely wish to greet you. Good evening. May the Red God or the Seven, or whichever deity you favor, watch over you." With a final mischievous grin, he slipped away, his footsteps echoing against the stone. Sansa remained at the railing, gaze drifting back to the knights sparring below. The Martells, the Tyrells, the Lannisters, her own Starks, and the Targaryens, all swirling together in this cauldron of power. She felt a mounting urgency to prepare, to do something tangible that would protect herself and those she cared about. When she returned to her chambers, she discovered Aegon there, shedding his black cloak with visible relief. He glanced up as she entered, a small smile touching his lips. "You look thoughtful," he said, removing a pair of gloves. "What weighs on you?" She hesitated. "I spoke with my mother about the Lannisters, and with Prince Oberyn about Dorne. There are so many pieces in play. I wonder if you feel as overwhelmed as I do." "Namsteshti." He ran a hand through his hair, pale strands catching the waning light from the window. "I do. But I also feel determined. We have the North, and your mother is here. The Tyrells want to extend funds. The Martells watch with cautious interest. If we can balance their competing interests, Perhaps we can avoid another war." Her breath left in a slow exhale. "I'd like that. I'd like an end to the constant fear that the city will erupt in violence." She moved closer to him, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. There was a sense of closeness now that came more naturally since the wedding. She could not name it love yet, but it was something akin to trust. "How was your meeting with the Stormlands bannermen?" He sighed. "Difficult. They recall the Baratheons leading rebellions against my family's forebears. They want assurances that I won't punish them for their past allegiances. I gave them my word, but it's not enough. They need something to hold in their hands. Perhaps new trade routes, or the promise that their children's futures will be secure at court. Politics is a tangle of bartered promises." "Nay." She nodded, knowing his frustration. "Perhaps you could arrange a marriage alliance with one of the Baratheon lords to bring them into the fold. It would show good faith." He lifted his brows. "You sound like a strategist already." He eased off his boots and gestured for her to sit. She joined him, perched on the edge of the settee. He considered her words. "The idea has merit, though I wonder who among them would be a suitable match." She shrugged. "It might not need to be a match of close kin. Even one of your loyal followers marrying into House Baratheon could help. My mother once said that betrothals are the threads that can stitch a broken realm. If we can weave enough alliances, maybe we can keep it from tearing at the seams." "No one's." He regarded her for a moment, as if seeing her anew. "Sansa, truly, you impress me. You're a far cry from the frightened girl they described. Your father would be proud." Her throat tightened with emotion, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm only trying to survive. If I can do that by helping you govern wisely, then I will." "Neptune." He leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. For a moment, she closed her eyes, allowing the warmth of that gesture to seep in. Then he stood, offering her his hand. "Come. We've time before supper. Shall we walk in the gardens?" She accepted, letting him guide her. Their footsteps moved in unison down the corridor, past the silent sentinels who bowed as they passed. The hush of the Red Keep at this hour was a reprieve from the usual bustle. They descended a curving flight of stone steps that led to the royal gardens, an enclosed space of greenery carefully curated to impress foreign dignitaries. Torches had been lit along the pathways, casting flickering light on rose bushes and lilac shrubs. The evening air was warm, a faint breeze carrying the mingled scents of honeysuckle and salt from the bay. They strolled side by side, the footpaths winding beneath flowering trellises. A fountain trickled softly near the center, the water shimmering in the torchlight. Sansa found herself relaxing, the tension in her spine easing. For a time, they did not speak, content to share the moment of relative peace. At length, Aegon paused near a marble statue of some long-deceased king, his features so eroded by time, it was hard to tell which. He turned to face Sansa, his expression quiet. "I know we haven't had much chance to just be ourselves," he said. "Everything moves so fast here. Councils, alliances, negotiations. But I'd like to take these moments like now and simply talk to you about things that aren't political. About who you are, who I am. Is that foolish?" She felt a surge of relief and gratitude. "It's not foolish at all," she assured him. "I miss talking about simple things. In Winterfell, my sister Arya and I would sometimes argue about which of us was braver, or who could catch the biggest fish in the stream. All inconsequential things, but they made life feel real." Her throat tightened at the thought of Arya, gone to parts unknown. She swallowed. "What of you? What did you do for fun when you were being raised in exile?" He gave a wistful laugh. "Fun was scarce, but I did have a few joys. My mentors taught me the sword, of course, but I preferred reading old tales of Valyria, imagining dragons and ancient wonders. Sometimes I'd sneak out to the docks to watch the ships come in. I used to dream of traveling to Westeros, but I never imagined it would be like this." Their conversation meandered, drifting through recollections of childhood, the small triumphs and heartbreaks that shaped them. Sansa found herself giggling softly at a story he told of trying to hide a lame kitten in the stables when he was a boy, only to be caught by his stern tutor. He chuckled at her tales of being teased by Arya for her ladylike sewing skills. The warmth between them, so tentative at first, expanded in the hush of the gardens. As they moved on, she spotted a cluster of lemon trees beyond a low hedge. The sight made her lips curve in a small smile. She murmured, "In Winterfell, lemons never grew. They had to be brought from the south. Sometimes I dreamt of lemon cakes the way some dream of gold. Strange, isn't it?" He reached out, touching a budding branch. "Perhaps we can bring some of these to your mother, or to your family. The next time we send a supply convoy north. Share a taste of the south with them." The notion filled her with a soft ache. Would her family be able to enjoy such luxuries? Or was the north now embattled, struggling after the wars? She resolved to ask her mother about it. For now, she let the gentle hush wash over her. They lingered a little while longer, until the sky darkened and the stars emerged in scattered clusters overhead. When they finally returned to their chambers, it was late. Servants had left a small supper on a side table. Stew, fresh bread, a jug of spiced wine that had cooled to lukewarm. They ate quietly, exchanging contented glances. When the meal was done, Aegon walked to the window, pushing the shutters wide so the night air could flow in. Sansa joined him, resting her hand along the rough stone ledge. Below, King's Landing stretched in a patchwork of flickering lanterns and starlit rooftops. The city never truly slept. One could always hear the distant calls of sellswords or the drunken laughter of tavern-goers. From up here, it seemed almost peaceful, a tapestry of human lights glimmering against the dark. She wondered if, somewhere in those winding streets, her old illusions still walked like ghosts. The naive girl who believed in storybook kings and golden-haired princes. The memories felt bittersweet, a reminder of how much she'd grown. Aegon's shoulder brushed hers. "We should rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow brings more councils, and I've promised to address the matter of a potential alliance with the Vale as well." She sighed. "I forgot about the Vale. My Aunt Elisa could be difficult, though she's gone now, I suppose. Still, the Vale's knights could be crucial in shoring up the crown's defenses." "Oh, He nodded. "Another entangled thread for us to manage. But one step at a time." They moved together toward the bed, shedding their ceremonial garments piece by piece. Slipping beneath the covers, Sansa found herself exhaling slowly as Aegon blew out the last candle. In the darkness, she felt the warmth of his body, his breath near her temple. Timidly, she shifted closer, and he welcomed her, wrapping an arm around her waist. The sense of comfort that came from his nearness was surprising to her, even now. She let her eyes drift shut, recalling how once she dreaded the wedding bed. But here, she could find a measure of solace. Perhaps that was enough for this moment. Morning broke in a pale wash of light. She awoke to find herself tucked against his side, her cheek resting on his chest. For a few precious seconds, she allowed herself simply to listen to his heartbeat, to feel the subtle rise of his breathing. Then the demands of the day pulled her thoughts awake. There were visitors to greet, letters to sign, and rumors to quell. She eased away, reluctant yet resigned. He stirred, blinking in the sunlight. They shared a soft, drowsy smile before servants tapped on the door to announce the arrival of breakfast. As she sipped warm tea and nibbled toast, slathered with jam, she found her mind returning to the chessboard of Westeros. Indeed, the Vale, the North, the Reach, Dorne, the Stormlands. All these factions could tear a fragile monarchy apart, if not handled with deftness. She glanced at Aegon, who was reading a letter with a slight frown etched on his brow. His hair, tousled from sleep, gave him a boyish look, but his expression was that of a man burdened by the weight of his birthright. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "It's from my advisors at Storm's End," he said, handing her the parchment. "They report pockets of bandits in the hills, remnants of the war. They threaten trade caravans. The local lords request coin and men to reinforce their guard." Sansa scanned the neat script. She tried to recall the geography of the Stormlands. The terrain was rugged, the weather fierce. She pictured those remote villages struggling after years of conflict. "Could we send a few knights from the Crownlands at least as a show of support?" she suggested. And maybe a small fund to help repair roads. Trade will benefit us if they're able to safely transport goods. Aegon nodded thoughtfully. That seems wise. We'll have to rearrange a few allocations in the treasury, but perhaps the Tyrells can help bridge the gap temporarily with their generous offers of gold. He set the parchment aside. Every day, another piece of this puzzle emerges. I used to think claiming the throne meant rallying an army and taking King's Landing by force. But in truth, it's 1,000 careful negotiations. She reached for his hand. Then let's negotiate it together, piece by piece. My father taught me that listening is as great a skill as speaking. Perhaps that's what the realm needs, a ruler who listens. He squeezed her fingers. Yes, I'll try. They finished breakfast in subdued companionship, then parted ways to attend their tasks. Sansa accompanied a handful of ladies-in-waiting to the throne room, where, that afternoon, various petitioners would come to present their cases before King Aegon and Queen Sansa. The notion filled her with nervous energy. She had never presided over such proceedings, except in fleeting instances at Winterfell, when her father might humor her with small tasks. Now, the gravity was real. The great hall blazed with light as the midday sun poured through the high windows. Targaryen banners of black and red draped from the rafters, accompanied by a single Stark banner near the front. Sansa took her seat beside Aegon. Her mother stood a few steps behind, offering moral support. The hall had been arranged so that a line of petitioners could approach, each given a short time to state their case. Gold cloaks stood ready to maintain order. The first to approach was an old merchant, clad in dusty robes. He bowed with surprising grace for his age. "Your Graces," he began, "I come to beg assistance. My caravans have been attacked on the Roserad by highwaymen. I have lost 3 wagons of goods and men's lives besides. We are decent folk, loyal to the crown. We ask for protection." Aegon leaned forward, voice calm. "We have heard reports of banditry. We will send patrols to the roads where your caravans travel. Provide the details to the steward so we can plan the route." The merchant bowed deeply, tears glimmering in his eyes. "Thank you, my king. Thank you, my queen." He left, ushered away by attendants. And Sansa felt a swelling sense of responsibility. This man had come to them with desperation in his voice, and they had given him hope. Could they follow through? Next came a pair of minor lords disputing a boundary between their lands, each accusing the other of encroachment. They bickered incessantly, voices rising. Sansa listened, heart thumping, uncertain how to mediate. Aegon exchanged a quick glance with her, a silent question. Gathering her courage, Sansa raised a hand. "My lords," she interjected, voice echoing in the hall. "When you both speak at once, we can understand neither. Take turns." Her tone was gentle yet firm. Surprised, the lords snapped their mouths shut, glancing at her. She continued softly. "We'll hear you out, and then we shall decide. But we require civility." A murmur passed through the hall at the Queen's intervention. Aegon offered her a nod as if to say, "Go on." She gestured to the First Lord to speak, who presented a map and insisted the farmland in question had long been in his family's domain. The Second Lord responded in kind, claiming the land was rightfully his by marriage contract. Sansa weighed their words. She recalled her training with her mother, who taught her how to parse estate disputes. Once both had spoken, she looked to Aegon. He studied the map, asked a few clarifying questions, then turned to her. "What do you think, my queen?" he asked, letting all in the hall see his trust in her. Her cheeks warmed, but she steadied herself. "I believe the farmland in question may be divided. The orchard belongs to Lord Tam, as the old records appear to show. But the grazing field was likely never part of his domain. If he's willing, they can settle this dispute by formalizing that border. That way, each lord retains the land that rightfully belongs to him, and there is no more confusion in the future." And then the two lords exchanged startled glances, as though they hadn't expected such direct guidance from the new queen. A hush spread. Then grudgingly, they assented, each bowing low before the dais. "A wise decree," one murmured, while the other offered, "We thank your graces for your fairness," and they withdrew. leaving Sansa with a sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that these issues would keep appearing, day after day. By the time the line of petitioners dwindled, the sun had shifted in the sky, casting long rays across the hall. Aegon leaned back, expression weary yet satisfied. Sansa felt a matching fatigue, her mind spinning with the weight of judgments and half-glimpsed intrigues in each petitioner's face. Still, a small glow of pride lit within her, for she had taken an active role, and Aegon had not only allowed it but encouraged it. As the last petitioner was ushered out, Tyrion approached with a ledger under one arm. "Your Graces, you have done well. The people may begin to see a new face of leadership. A queen who listens is a valuable thing." He bowed, and though his words seemed genuine, Sansa remained aware of the potential hidden cunning behind them. He straightened, continuing, "Shall we adjourn and discuss tomorrow's agenda?" Aegon nodded, rising with a soft groan as he stretched his shoulders. Sansa stood as well, smoothing her skirts. Together, they left the throne room, each step echoing as they ascended the stone steps to a smaller chamber for further meetings. The days unfolded in a similar pattern thereafter: councils, petitions, quiet moments of respite in the gardens or on the balcony. In the evenings, they would share a meal, sometimes with Lady Catelyn, or with lords who pressed for favor, sometimes alone. The slow rhythm of their union began to take shape. As the weeks trickled on, Sansa noticed slight but discernible changes. The Red Keep felt less cold, though still fraught with tensions. She saw fewer mocking stares from the Lannisters, though Cersei's presence remained a watchful threat. The common folk, glimpsed from windows and balconies, seemed uncertain yet somewhat hopeful. Word spread of the new queen's gentleness and the new king's measured fairness. She overheard servants gossiping about how Aegon was unlike the Mad King of old, and how Sansa, though once betrothed to Joffrey, carried herself with quiet dignity. There was a promise in the air, fragile as spring blossoms, but shadows still lurked. More than once, ravens arrived bearing grim tidings, roving sellswards in the Riverlands, a rumored rebellion stirring among former Targaryen loyalists, who felt Aegon was not Targaryen enough, and murmurings from the east that Daenerys Stormborn was also gathering power. Each rumor weighed on Aegon, and Sansa could see the worry etched in his features when he thought she wasn't looking. She wanted to ease that burden but knew she was powerless against far-flung threats. All she could do was support him, stand at his side, and help maintain stability in the capital. One evening they dined alone in a small alcove near the southwestern tower, a simple meal of roasted capon, barley soup, and fruit tarts. A warm breeze drifted through the open archways, carrying the tang of the sea. Aegon seemed restless, his gaze often drifting to the horizon. Sansa reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "What troubles you?" she asked gently. He hesitated before speaking. "I received word that my aunt Daenerys has 3 dragons and is waging her own war across the narrow sea. Some say she intends to cross into Westeros soon. Her claim to the throne might overshadow my own in the eyes of many. They call her the Mother of Dragons." He gave a hollow laugh. "Imagine if she arrives here with actual dragons at her command. Where would that leave me?" Sansa's stomach clenched. She had heard the rumors. Daenerys Targaryen, the last living child of the Mad King, rising in the east with fire and blood. The idea of real dragons descending upon King's Landing seemed like something out of ancient myth. She squeezed Aegon's hand. "You are the rightful king, recognized by many houses. But we must tread carefully. If she does come, you may have to decide between alliance or conflict. War with a dragon queen would be catastrophic." "None." He nodded. "I know. I just never learned how to handle living family. She might despise me for taking what she believes is her birthright." His eyes filled with worry. "I'm not sure if we could share the throne." She understood his fear. The Targaryens had famously wed brother to sister to keep the bloodline pure. But these were different times, different circumstances. You are forging alliances here. If Daenerys truly cares for the Targaryen legacy, maybe she would see reason. But that is a worry for the future. For now, we must strengthen your rule, ensure the realm is stable. Then, he nodded, though uncertainty still marred his brow. I know. Thank you for your counsel, Sansa. She offered a gentle smile, though her own anxiety fluttered in her chest. The prospect of another Targaryen with dragons arriving to stake a claim loomed like a thundercloud on the horizon. But she pushed the fear away, focusing on the here and now, on the meal shared, on the flickering candlelight dancing across Aegon's face, on the knowledge that they were building something that might endure if they were cautious and resolute. They finished the meal and rose together, strolling to the open arches that looked out over the city. Far below, lights flickered in the streets and alleyways. Stars dotted the sky. Aegon slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. She rested her head on his shoulder, eyes drifting closed in the soft hush. The moment felt strangely peaceful, as though the larger troubles of the world were held at bay by the quiet intimacy of their union. He turned, pressing a kiss to her hair. I never thought I'd find any measure of peace in this city, he murmured. But I do when I'm with you. Her heart thumped at his words. She tipped her face upward, meeting his gaze, and he leaned in to brush her lips with a tender kiss. As they lingered there, the city's nighttime hum pulsing below, Sansa allowed herself a fleeting sense of security. Perhaps, for a while, it would last. The realm might yet accept them, dragons or no dragons, so long as they governed with fairness and patience. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more bargains, more subtle chess moves. But tonight, she was Sansa Targaryen, sharing a moment of quiet solace with her husband, the man who tried to lead by calm example rather than fear. She recalled the old songs she used to love, the ballads of knights and queens forging legends under moonlit skies. Maybe their story would never be a perfect song, but perhaps it could be something truer, something shaped by the cautious hope in her heart and the earnest resolve in his. Together, they turned from the archway, hand in hand, and retreated into the lamplit corridor, bound by marriage, by shared dreams of a gentler future, and by the intangible thread of fate that had brought wolf and dragon together under the same roof. Night settled over King's Landing like a velvety drape, pinpricked by flickering torchlight from the streets below. In the royal bedchamber, Sansa lay awake, listening to Aegon's slow, even breathing. She could feel the weight of his arm draped over her waist, the warmth of his body chasing away the lingering chill in her heart. Beyond the shutters, the city never truly slept. Drunken laughter occasionally filtered through the darkness, the moan of a distant trumpet, and somewhere, a dog barking at shadows. She had half-dozed, drifting between fragments of dreams, but now consciousness had returned, edged with a mild restlessness. There were too many thoughts swirling inside her, and no lullaby could quite soothe them. She slipped carefully from his embrace, moving as quietly as she could, so as not to disturb him. Her white shift whispered around her ankles in the faint glow of a single bedside candle. By that trembling light, she observed his sleeping face. His silver blonde hair lay scattered across the pillow, and his brow was smooth. In slumber, he looked so young, as though free from the burdens that weighed on him during the day. A gentle pang tugged at her heart. She had grown more fond of him than she ever thought possible. Sometimes she found herself surprised by how readily he shared his anxieties, his hopes, his kindness. It was a delicate thing, blossoming under the relentless scrutiny of the court. She prayed it might endure. She rose and moved to the window, nudging the shutters open. The night breeze touched her cheeks, carrying that inescapable city smell of salt, dung, smoke, and spices. Lanterns along the docks shimmered like pale ghosts. She could make out ships rocking at anchor, their masts swaying. Beyond them, the inky sprawl of the sea merged with the star-studded sky. She breathed in, letting the air fill her lungs, reminding herself she was alive. She was here, and she had a chance to shape the future. It felt unreal at times, as though she still lived in a dream of songs and stories, but reality had proven both harsher and more nuanced than any ballad she once sang. Her thoughts circled back to the whispers of Daenerys Targaryen. 3 living dragons. An army forging across the sea. The idea of dragons both enthralled and unnerved her. She had grown up hearing how the Targaryens of old brought all of Westeros to heel with dragons, forging the Iron Throne itself in the fires of conquest. She worried that the realm might face devastation if Aegon and Daenerys became rival claimants. And if, somehow, she did come peacefully, what would it mean for Sansa's place at Aegon's side? Quietly, she pushed the notion aside, reminding herself it was a worry for later. They had enough concerns right here in King's Landing. She closed the shutters carefully and slipped back to bed, telling herself that morning would bring clarity. When morning did come, it arrived in a pale wash of sun through the curtains, accompanied by the soft bustle of attendants in the corridor. Aegon stirred, blinking awake. She felt his hand reach across the bed, searching for her. She turned, meeting his gaze, and smiled. "Good morning," she murmured. He stretched, a soft groan escaping him. "Morning," he echoed. "I dreamt of the Vale last night, of eagles circling high peaks and howling winds. Perhaps it's a sign we should move forward with forging a stronger alliance there." Nenep Satin. She brushed a strand of hair from his brow. "The Val's nights could be invaluable, especially if we hope to keep the realm united." She paused before adding, "My Aunt Lysa is gone, but her son still rules in name, though he's a mere boy. If we extend a careful hand to his regents, they might come to see us as protectors, rather than usurpers." He nodded, his eyes still soft with the warmth of sleep. "Yes. We'll discuss it at council." He seemed about to say more, but a timid knock on the door announced the arrival of breakfast. They sat up, allowing the servants to roll in a cart laden with fresh bread, boiled eggs, hot cider, and stewed fruit. The aroma made Sansa's stomach rumble. She felt a quiet gratitude for these simple pleasures. During the worst of her captivity under the Lannisters' thumb, she had often felt too nauseated by stress to enjoy food. Now, though, she was ready to face the day's demands with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the meal, Aegon read a few letters that had been delivered at dawn. One concerned the pirates harrying ships from the harbor. Another detailed complaints from merchants about city taxes. Sansa listened, asking questions here and there, as she had learned to do in these past weeks. Her father once told her that half of good governance was truly hearing the people's grievances, the other half deciding how to fix them. Aegon's frustration showed in a furrow of his brow. "The city is hungry for coin," he said, "and our coffers are not bottomless. We must find a way to ease the common folk's burden without risking an empty treasury." Mantimarao. She understood the delicate balance. Taxing the small folk too heavily might spark unrest, but ignoring the crown's debts could be even worse. "Maybe the Tyrell alliance can help us float some short-term relief until harvests come in," she suggested. "We can speak to Marguerite. She's proven willing to negotiate on her family's behalf." He sighed, but a small light of hope flickered in his eyes. "Yes, let's do that. We must step carefully, though, or the court will accuse us of becoming too reliant on Highgarden's gold. Politics has a memory like an elephant, or so I've heard." Then naively, she reached across to squeeze his hand. "We'll handle it, piece by piece," she said, echoing the mantra that had become their shared comfort. They finished eating and dressed in courtly attire. Sansa chose a gown of pale gray silk, embroidered at the sleeves, with subtle hints of red and black, an echo of her new Targaryen colors alongside her Stark heritage. A few maids helped arrange her hair, weaving braids that encircled the crown of her head, while the rest flowed down her back. Standing before the mirror, she caught a glimpse of a poised young woman where once there had been a timid girl. It brought a lump to her throat, a mixture of pride and melancholy. She was still Sansa, but so much had changed in her heart that she scarcely recognized parts of herself. The day's official business began in the throne room, where a delegation from the Vale awaited an audience. Word of their arrival had come late the previous night. 3 knights and 2 representatives claiming to speak on behalf of young Lord Robin Arryn. When Sansa and Aegon entered the Great Hall, there was a moment of hush, followed by a series of low bows and curtsies. Aegon assumed his seat just in front of the Iron Throne, on a smaller cushioned chair set upon a dais. Sansa sat beside him, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. The knights from the Vale were tall men with proud bearings, their surcoats bearing the moon and falcon sigil. One, who introduced himself as Sir Ronald Waynwood, spoke on behalf of the group. His voice was smooth, carrying across the hall. "Your Grace, we come bearing respects from the Lord's Declarant of the Vale. Lord Robin Arryn remains in delicate health and thus cannot travel to King's Landing, but we represent his interests. We have heard much of your rule and wish to know your intentions for the Vale." Aegon inclined his head graciously. "We are grateful for your journey here, Sir Ronald. The Vale is integral to the realm. I know it has stood largely apart from the recent turmoils, but we hope to welcome it into our circle of trust, the eerie support which strengthen the peace we all crave." No. Sir Ronald's expression remained guarded. "As you say, Your Grace, the Vale has mostly preserved its neutrality. Many in the Vale question who truly sits on the Iron Throne. Some recall Joffrey Baratheon's claim, others wonder at Stannis or your own. And there are rumors of a Targaryen queen in the east. Our lords wish to be certain of your legitimacy before pledging swords." The silence that followed felt charged. Sansa could all but taste the tension in the air. She inhaled, preparing to speak. "Sir Ronald," she said, her voice steady. "You know me as Sansa Stark, born of Winterfell. My family has always sought to protect the realm from chaos. King Aegon is recognized by many houses now. He is not a stranger, nor a usurper. He seeks to unite the Seven Kingdoms in peace, not tear them further apart." One of the other knights, a weathered man with silver in his hair, frowned. "Begging your pardon, my queen, but we have heard different accounts. Some claim this Aegon is a pretender foisted on the realm by certain ambitious factions. They say the real Aegon Targaryen perished as an infant." "Sir." A stir ran through the hall. Aegon raised a hand, quelling the murmurs. His voice took on a firmer edge. "I understand your concern. Many have questioned my parentage. I have been tested by those who traveled with me from Essos. They saw the birthmark, the matching lineage records that my guardians preserved, the knowledge only a true Targaryen heir would hold. Moreover, I carry forward my mother's line. Elia of Dorne. Prince Doran Martell has given his blessing. If any man thinks to challenge my blood, let him do so openly, and we can address it." "Bethany Hewan." Elval. Sir Ronald's eyes flickered with consideration. Prince Doran's endorsement carries weight indeed. Still, the Vale wants assurances of stability. What do you offer us beyond words and a crown claimed by right of blood? Sansa sensed the crux of their mission. She exchanged a glance with Aegon, and saw he too recognized the bargaining that lay beneath the surface. "We are prepared," Sansa said carefully, "to recognize the importance of the Vale in our new era. That could mean favorable trade terms, seats on the small council, or alliances through marriage. The specifics can be negotiated. But we ask for the Vale's pledge of loyalty in return." The older knight inclined his head. "It is a beginning, Your Grace. Perhaps if it pleases you, we might discuss the details in private council. We are not so stubborn that we would turn our backs on a realm that seeks prosperity." The tension in the air eased fractionally. Aegon beckoned for Tyrion Lannister, who stood nearby with a ledger, ready to record the terms of discussion. "Sir Ronald, my queen and I look forward to further talks. For now, accept our hospitality. Rooms will be prepared for you and your men. We want to show you the courtesy befitting the Vale's knights." With that, the delegation bowed low. The court herald guided them away, and Sansa exhaled. Her attention drifted to the edges of the great hall, where other nobles watched, quietly forming opinions. Cersei Lannister was not present, but no doubt she would hear of every word spoken. Sansa wondered how that knowledge would shape Cersei's next move. For the moment, however, the immediate challenge was navigated. In the quieter space that followed, a small handful of petitioners remained to be heard. Most brought mundane complaints, a dispute over land inheritance, a plea for compensation after a stable fire. Sansa and Aegon addressed each in turn, alternating who took the lead. She found herself growing more confident, more adept at reading the undercurrents in each request. She began to understand that behind even the simplest grievances lay a tangled weave of loyalties and grudges. When the final petitioner departed, the hall gradually emptied. Sansa felt a dull ache in her lower back, a reminder of how long she had sat, poised upon the dais. Aegon turned to her with a faint, weary grin. "Shall we rest for a time, or go straight to the negotiations with the Vale men?" he asked, flexing his shoulders. She rose, smoothing the skirts of her gown. "A brief rest, perhaps. My mother has asked to see me, and I'd like to gather her thoughts on forging an alliance with the Vale. She knows those lords better than I." He nodded, stepping closer. "I'll join you. Lady Catelyn has a clear mind for such matters. We can speak with her, then proceed to the Solar to host the Vale Knights." Together, they left the throne room, passing under the looming presence of the Iron Throne itself. Sansa wondered if either of them would ever grow accustomed to that intimidating chair of fused steel. Though Aegon was by all rights the occupant, she could see how the raw symbolism of it weighed on him. The corridors leading away from the throne grew quieter with each step, the clamor of the court fading behind them. Guards in Targaryen livery stood at intervals, saluting as the king and queen passed. They reached a small courtyard where Lady Catelyn Stark stood in conversation with Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, who had recently arrived from Riverrun. Catelyn caught sight of Sansa and Aegon approaching and dipped her head in acknowledgement. Her auburn hair was threaded with more silver than before, but her posture was as straight as any knight's. Brynden Tully, grizzled and sharp-eyed, studied them with measured approval. Sansa greeted them, voice tinged with relief. "Uncle, I'm glad you're here. How fares Riverrun?" He grunted, crossing muscular arms over his chest. "Fair enough, though the Riverlands remain fractured. We keep hearing talk of outlaws in the woods, likely the aftermath of all those battles. They're hungry, desperate, but that doesn't make them less dangerous." He eyed Aegon. "So you're the new Targaryen king, are you? I've heard you're forging alliances instead of burning castles. That's different from what my generation saw. I wish you well, lad. The realm can use a gentler hand." Aegon bowed his head slightly. "I appreciate that, Lord Brynden. I'll do my best to not repeat the errors of my forebears." Brynden gave a curt nod, then turned to Catelyn. She placed a hand on his arm before she spoke. "Sansa, my dear, you must be exhausted after the audience. Did it go well?" Sansa recounted the exchange with the Vale Knights. Her mother listened carefully, lips tight with concentration. "The Lord's declarant can be proud," Catelyn said, "but not all are as stubborn as they pretend. It was Petyr Baelish who influenced the Vale for a time, though the Lords never fully trusted him. They'll be relieved to see a recognized authority in King Aegon, if you can give them enough incentive." Sansa tensed at the mention of Petyr Baelish. Memories of his manipulations haunted her. She had neither seen nor heard from him in recent weeks, which worried her almost as much as if he'd been skulking about openly. "I only hope he doesn't appear to throw a spanner in the works. He was quite skilled at that." Catelyn's eyes flickered. "We cannot rule out his involvement. The man has a talent for vanishing and reappearing in the midst of chaos. But for now, at least, the Vale's delegates seem willing to negotiate in good faith. You and the king can seal that bond if you offer them something tangible. Perhaps the marriage match we discussed, or a specific seat on the small council. Show them they have a voice in Aegon's new reign. Show them they have a voice in Aegon's new reign." Aegon looked thoughtful. "A seat on the council is manageable. As for marriage, we must see who among their younger lords is suitable, and who among our circle is free to be matched. Such arrangements can bind great houses together, but we must choose carefully. Remember where?" Catelyn nodded in approval. "Precisely. If we can anchor the Vale, then combined with the North, the Riverlands, and the Reach, your claim will be that much harder to challenge." They lingered in the courtyard, discussing finer details. Sansa felt hardened by her mother's experience. Brynden added his own thoughts on the temperament of various Vale lords, occasionally sprinkling his remarks with wry humor. Despite the heaviness of the topic, the presence of family steadied Sansa, reminding her that she was not alone in navigating these tumultuous waters. Once they had a strategy in mind, Aegon led Sansa away, heading toward the Solar where the Vale Knights awaited. The Solar was a gracious room, its high windows draped with crimson and silver hangings that let in ample sunlight. A table of polished oak stood in the center, arrayed with maps of the Vale and the adjacent crownlands. Pitchers of wine and plates of fresh fruit had been laid out in an attempt at hospitality. As the king and queen entered, the knights rose to their feet, bowing once more in respectful greeting. Sir Ronel gestured for his companions to sit as Aegon and Sansa took their places. Tyrion Lannister was already there, perched on a cushioned stool with a ledger open on his knee. Margaery Tyrell was present too, as an observer. Her expression was serene, eyes bright with curiosity. Oberyn Martell had also decided to watch, his arms folded, a slight smirk playing on his lips, as though everything about King's Landing amused him. Aegon wasted no time. Sir Ronald, as we mentioned earlier, we believe in forging a mutual arrangement. In exchange for the Vale's pledge of fealty, we are prepared to offer several measures. First, representation on my small council. 1 seat dedicated to a Vale delegate of Lord Robin Arryn's choosing. Second, priority in certain trade agreements that flow through Gulltown. Third, the right to station a small Vale garrison here in the capital, symbolizing our trust in your house protection. Nah. Sir Ronald exchanged glances with his companions, interest sparking in their eyes. Those terms are substantial, he acknowledged. The seat on the council alone would ensure the Val's voice is not overlooked. One of the other knights, Sir Freyton, leaned forward. And in return, your grace, we vow to rally our forces should the crown require them, to recognize you as the lawful king of Westeros, and to uphold the peace you seek. He hesitated, then added, but what of Lord Robin's future? He is young. Some of us believe that a betrothal might strengthen ties further. Sansa's heart clenched slightly, expecting this turn. Betrothals were the currency of alliances. She wondered which lady they had in mind. Aegon, too, seemed prepared. That is a possibility, he said. We can discuss potential matches. However, we won't rush into it. Lord Robin's health is fragile, and we must ensure any match is suitable for both parties. He paused, glancing at Sansa. We do not wish to use marriage as a mere tool without considering the well-being of those involved. Oberyn Martell snorted softly, but kept his thoughts to himself. Margaery offered a bright, non-committal smile. Tyrion scribbled notes, eyes flickering around to gauge reactions. Sansa noticed Sir Ronald's thoughtful nod, indicating an appreciation for the king's stance. They began hammering out details. How many knights from the Vale would station themselves in King's Landing? Which roads were to be prioritized for improvements? How trade tariffs would be adjusted? The conversation grew dense with specifics, but Sansa followed it with practiced care. Each concession from one side required a balancing concession from the other. At times, the knights pressed for more. Aegon calmly held firm or offered minor compromises. Sansa admired how he navigated these demands. The boyish uncertainty he sometimes showed in private was replaced by a measured confidence here. As the negotiations stretched on, a servant appeared with fresh wine. Sansa sipped from her goblet sparingly, wanting to keep a clear head. She noticed Margaery Tyrell swirling her cup with that polite, unreadable smile. Every now and then, Margaery made a gentle suggestion, hinting that House Tyrell might facilitate certain trade routes. Oberyn chipped in a sardonic remark about the possibility of a direct route from Dorne to the Vale, which elicited a few raised eyebrows. Sansa realized this was how power functioned in the capital. Every gesture, every word, carefully placed to glean advantage or reveal vulnerability. At last, near sunset, the main framework of an agreement was reached. Sir Ronald rose from the table, inclination of his head signifying cautious approval. We will bring these terms back to the Eyrie for Lord Robin's formal assent. However, I believe many of our lords will find it acceptable. My king and queen, thank you for your willingness to compromise. Dr. Mikator. Aegon stood as well, offering his hand for Sir Ronald to clasp. I look forward to the Vale standing beside the crown once more. Safe travels when you depart, but stay as our guests until your men are rested. The knights bowed, departing the Solar with an aura of guarded optimism. Oberyn trailed after them, likely to glean more rumors. Tyrion snapped his ledger shut with a flourish, then slipped out with a quick bow to Sansa and Aegon. Margaery lingered, approaching with a delicate swirl of her skirts. "Your Graces," she said, her voice warm, "I must say you handled yourselves with admirable poise. The veil can be prickly, but you offered them exactly what they needed to hear. I do wonder, though, if perhaps some arrangement can be made for the Tyrells to aid with improving those roads. We can supply wheat and barley seeds to the mountain folk, for a price." Sansa tilted her head. She had learned enough by now to recognize when Margaery's sweet tone masked a strategic request. "We appreciate your willingness to help, Lady Margaery. We shall keep you in mind when the time comes to formalize trade expansions." "Naterwendo." Margaery smiled, dimples appearing in her cheeks. "Ace ever, House Tyrell stands ready. I shall leave you to your rest. I know how draining such meetings can be." With a graceful curtsy, she took her leave, the swish of her gown vanishing beyond the door. Alone and at last with Aegon, Sansa let out a long breath. "My head is spinning with all those details." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mine too. But it seems we made progress. If the Vale truly joins us, that's one more cornerstone in holding the realm together." He paused, turning to gaze out the Solar's high window. The sky was tinged with orange and pink, the sun dipping beyond the horizon. Soft shadows stretched across the table. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I expected to be fighting battles with swords and armies upon my return to Westeros. Instead, I fight battles with promises and parchment. Perhaps it's for the best." She stepped to his side, resting a hand on his shoulder. "A war avoided is countless lives saved. People want peace, no matter how fragile it might feel. If we can secure that, we will have done more good than any conqueror." "Not over." He turned to her, a faint smile curving his lips. "You remind me that there's more than one way to wear a crown." "Thank you, Sansa." She felt a stirring in her chest at his gentle words, the subtle gratitude shining in his eyes. "You wear it better than most, I think," she replied, voice soft. He lifted her hand, pressing it briefly against his cheek, and for a moment they stood in silence, letting the warmth of the dying sun wash over them. The hush was interrupted by a knock at the door. A guard stepped in, bowing stiffly. "Your Graces, the cook requests your presence at supper. Shall we arrange a private meal, or would you prefer to dine with the court?" Aegon looked to Sansa. She considered a moment, then said, "Perhaps a private meal tonight. We both need a respite from the watchful gazes." The guard bowed again, departing. They followed shortly, walking side by side through corridors that had fallen quiet, now that official business was done for the day. Passing the windows, Sansa glimpsed the reflection of their figures in the glass. The slender queen with auburn hair braided and pinned, the young king with Valyrian features. Wolf and dragon, bound together in an unlikely alliance. She wondered what the bards might say of them 100 years hence. They reached a small dining room adjacent to their bedchamber. The table was set for two, illuminated by a trio of tall candles. Simple dishes awaited them: roast fowl with herbs, a thick vegetable soup, crusty bread, and a pitcher of spiced wine. Aegon helped her into her seat, then settled across from her, exhaustion mingling with contentment in his posture. She felt it too, that deep, weary satisfaction of having accomplished something that day, of edging the realm a little closer to unity. As they ate, they spoke in low voices about trivial things: the pattern on the tablecloth, the newly planted rose bushes in the castle gardens, a memory from her childhood in Winterfell. He shared a small anecdote about an Associ sea captain who once tried to teach him a Bravosi dance. She laughed, imagining Aegon awkwardly stumbling through foreign steps. The tension of the day began to melt away, replaced by a comfortable warmth. When supper was done, a servant discreetly cleared the plates, leaving a small pot of fragrant tea. They sipped it in companionable silence, eyes meeting across the rim of their cups. Eventually, Aegon set his cup down and reached for her hand. "I feel as though I barely know how to be a husband in the midst of all these duties," he murmured. "We speak of alliances and treaties, but seldom of ourselves." A gentle regret laced his tone. She curled her fingers around his. "It's the reality of our station, I suppose," she replied softly. "There's little time left for our private selves. But the moments we do have I treasure." He let out a slow breath, nodding. "Me too." Standing, he led her from the dining room. They paused by the windows in their bedchamber, where the night sky revealed a sickle moon and a scattering of distant stars. From outside, the hush of the city drifted in. He drew her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his breath stir the hair at her temple. For a while, they simply stood there, letting the night envelop them. In the corner of her vision, she glimpsed the shadows cast by the single candle on the table, their silhouettes merging into one. She thought of the northern snows that still haunted her dreams, of the Targaryen legacy that burned in Aegon's veins, of the complexities and threats that lingered at every turn. Yet here, in this small pocket of quiet, there was a tenderness that nourished her spirit. She felt an echo of the girl who once yearned for a gallant prince. This was no perfect storybook romance, but something deeper, a bond forged by mutual respect and shared burdens, a softness that overcame the harshness of their world. When they eventually lay down to rest, the city still whispered beyond the stone walls. Aegon fell asleep first, his exhaustion evident. Sansa listened to his breathing, her own eyelids heavy yet her mind still adrift. She thought of the Vale Knights, of Cersei's lurking presence, of the uncertain threat Daenerys posed, of Petyr Baelish's unpredictable schemes. For better or worse, she was queen now, tied to a Targaryen, who might or might not succeed in bringing stability. But she had chosen to give her faith to him, and she intended to see it through. Slowly, weariness overtook her, and she descended into a dreamless slumber. The following day, the Vale Knights prepared to depart, satisfied for the moment with the provisional agreement. Sansa and Aegon bid them farewell in the courtyard, the white banners of the moon and falcon flapping in the brisk morning wind. A small retinue of guards escorted them beyond the city gates, watching them ride off. Sansa felt a sense of relief mingled with anticipation for their response. Politics was an unending dance, the steps changing at every turn. In the days that followed, the routine of governance continued, though the pace never truly slackened. Sansa convened with her mother, with Tyrion, and with Margaery at different intervals, each meeting unearthing new facets of the realm's intricacies. Rumors abounded that the Iron Bank of Braavos was growing impatient with the crown's unpaid debts. Another rumor suggested a faction of discontented lords in the Westerlands might rally around Tommen or Myrcella, or even Joffrey, if any of them re-emerged to press a claim. Tension coiled beneath the city's surface, but for now, it simmered rather than boiled. On a late afternoon, as she walked the corridors of the Red Keep, Sansa spotted a cloaked figure slipping around a corner. Something about the furtive motion set her on edge. She signaled to one of the nearby guards to investigate, but by the time they reached the corridor, it was empty. A fleeting chill ran through her. The Red Keep had its secrets, hidden passages snaking through ancient walls. Anyone with enough knowledge and cunning could come and go unseen. She recalled how Varys once used his little birds to gather secrets, and how Petyr Baelish had a knack for appearing where he wasn't expected. Dismissing her discomfort, she pressed on, reminding herself that she was no longer a powerless girl. She had allies, she had some measure of influence. Still, a prickle of caution remained. That evening, Sansa joined Aegon for another small council session. Around the table sat Tyrion, Margaery, Oberyn, a few other lords, and Lady Catelyn. They discussed the crown's finances in depth, reviewing the ledgers Tyrion provided. A gloom settled over the room as the numbers revealed the crown's dire debt. Even after promising certain revenues to the Tyrells for their loans, they were still behind on payments to the Iron Bank. Oberyn tapped his fingers against the table. Do not forget, the Iron Bank has a long memory. If it feels cheated, it can fund your enemies. Loans to Stannis perhaps, or even some other claimant. He shrugged, a predatory smile ghosting his lips. Such is the bank's way. It invests in whoever seems likely to repay. Aegon's shoulders squared. Then we must negotiate new terms. Perhaps we send an envoy to Braavos, someone with skill in diplomacy and a trustworthy reputation. Tyrion's mouth twitched in a faint smile. I volunteer, though I dare say the Iron Bank might recall my father's dealings less than fondly. Still, gold is gold, and my tongue is silver enough. If you can spare me from court for a time. Company. Aegon considered the offer, glancing at Sansa. She bit her lip, pondering. Sending Tyrion away might remove one of their more astute counselors from King's Landing. But if he truly could coax better terms from the Iron Bank, it might spare the realm a grave threat. It's worth the attempt, she said. But we cannot leave the capital short-handed in your absence. Tyrion tipped his head in acknowledgement. Then appoint whomever you trust to fill my duties in the interim. I'll depart as soon as you're ready. When. They hammered out the details, resolving that Tyrion would travel with a small entourage to Braavos within the week. Margaery offered to furnish some of the expenses for the journey, again ensuring the Tyrell name wove itself deeper into the crown's finances. By the end of the session, Sansa felt the knot of tension in her belly tighten anew. Danger loomed on so many fronts, and the solutions to each crisis demanded an ever more complicated interplay of alliances. When the council adjourned, she lingered in the chamber with Aegon, letting the others drift out. Tyrion and Oberyn were the last to leave, bickering quietly about the best type of ship to cross the narrow sea. Once the door latched shut, the hush felt profound. Aegon rubbed his temples. I sometimes wonder if ruling is all about debts, favors, and half-kept promises. Where is the grandeur the bards sing of? Sansa stepped behind him, laying her hands on his shoulders, feeling the taut muscles there. I think the bards omit the tedious parts, she said wryly. They focus on the victories and the tragedies, not the endless balancing of coins and egos. He gave a low laugh. True enough. But we persevere, don't we? He reached up, covering her hand with his. Let's walk in the yard. I need fresh air. They made their way to the central courtyard, where the late sun slanted across training dummies and archery targets. A few knights practiced on the far side, the ring of steel echoing faintly. Sansa noticed a familiar figure among them. Brienne of Tarth, taller than any man present, her blonde hair tied back in a practical braid. She was showing a younger squire how to properly hold a longsword. The sight warmed Sansa's heart. Brienne had once sworn to protect her mother. She had proven her loyalty again and again. Now, with the wars calmed, she served as a steadfast shield for Catelyn and Sansa both. Brienne caught sight of them and nodded respectfully. Her eyes shone with a mixture of pride and humility. Sansa returned the nod, wishing for a moment they could pause and speak. But Aegon tugged gently on her arm, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the yard beneath a tall oak tree. They stopped in the dappled shade, where a few scattered leaves crunched underfoot. He turned to face her. There's something I've been meaning to ask, but never found the right moment, he said. She saw uncertainty in his eyes, mingled with gentle concern. We've been married for some time now. How do you feel about children? The realm expects an heir, I know. But I don't want you to feel rushed or trapped. Her cheeks heated at the directness of his question. Thoughts tangled in her mind. She had been so consumed with court politics and personal survival that motherhood felt distant, almost unreal. And yet, it was inevitable that the realm would look for a future Targaryen king or queen. I've considered it, of course, she confessed. We've not used any means to prevent it. It may happen soon, or it may take time. I'm not sure, but I would welcome it, if it did. A tremor ran through her voice. I do fear the danger, though. My mother lost so many loved ones. Childbirth can be precarious. He reached out, capturing her hands in his. We will do everything to ensure your safety, Sansa. If the day comes, the best maesters in the realm will attend you. But if it's not time yet, if you're not ready, I promise not to press you. I simply wanted you to know that I'm thinking of the future, not just of the realm, but of our family. She squeezed his hands. Thank you, she whispered. I appreciate your concern. I truly do. She let out a breath, looking up at the branches overhead. The leaves rustled softly, golden in the evening light. We have a chance to shape a kinder world. Maybe our children, if we have them, will grow up without all the terrors we faced. His expression was tender. That is my greatest hope. Gently he drew her into an embrace. For a few precious moments, they simply stood there, arms around each other, the swirl of autumn air ruffling their clothes. The clang of distant steel and the murmuring voices of soldiers formed a muted backdrop. They parted when a guard approached with a bow, delivering a parchment sealed with the sigil of a falcon. "A raven from the Vale, your grace," he said. "It arrived just now." Aegon took the parchment, broke the seal, and scanned the contents. Sansa watched as his eyes skimmed the words, a subtle relief spreading across his features. "They agree to the terms," he said, glancing up with a smile. "Lord Robin Arryn and his advisors accept our offer of council representation, trade privileges, and a small Vale garrison here. In exchange, they formally acknowledge me as king." A wave of happiness surged in Sansa's chest. One more piece of the puzzle settled, at least for the moment. "That's wonderful news. It means we grow stronger each day." "Netashana." He nodded, tucking the parchment away. "Yes. Little by little, we gather the realm under one banner. Perhaps when the day comes that Daenerys lands on our shores, if she does, we'll be in a position to negotiate rather than fight." She did not miss the flicker of worry in his eyes at the mention of Daenerys. But for now, she focused on the victory at hand. The Vale was theirs. The North was theirs. The Riverlands, for the most part, supported them. The Reach was aligned through the Tyrell alliance. Dorne remained watchful, but had not opposed them. The Stormlands still harbored doubts, but step by step Aegon's rule was taking shape. There was a fragile hope in the air, one that Sansa clung to as fiercely as she once clung to childhood fairy tales. They strolled back toward the castle together, passing by Brienne's training session once more. The tall warrior woman paused, inclining her head in greeting. Sansa smiled at her, feeling a sense of security emanate from Brienne's presence. Safety, loyalty, and strength. These were qualities often in short supply at court, but Sansa was grateful to have them in such an ally. Inside, the corridors were alight with torches, and the bustle of the evening meal beckoned courtiers to the dining hall. Servants scurried by with trays of bread and fresh-caught fish. Laughter and chatter spilled from open archways, a sign that at least tonight, the capital was at peace. Sansa's gaze flicked over the crowd, catching glimpses of ladies in fine gowns, knights with freshly polished armor, a handful of traveling singers waiting for a chance to perform. She recognized some faces, though others were new arrivals, lured by the promise of a stable court. She spotted her mother stepping into the hall, conversing with Brynden Tully. Seeing them together gave her a stab of homesickness for Winterfell, for the simpler days before everything fractured. But then, Aegon's hand touched her back, guiding her gently forward. She remembered who she was now. Sansa Targaryen, queen beside the king, forging a new path for the realm. She would not let the past's sorrows derail what she might build here. They joined the feast. Musicians plucked at strings and blew softly on pipes, weaving a melody that danced around the hall. Servants arranged plates of roast pork, honeyed carrots, and fruit tarts. The lords and ladies exchanged polite banter, and now and then, Sansa heard fragments of conversation about the Vale's new alliance. Some seemed pleased, others cautious, but overall, the mood was one of calm acceptance. It felt like a moment in which the city itself exhaled a breath of relief. Midway through the meal, as Sansa was nibbling on a lemon cake, Aegon rose to propose a toast. His voice carried with ease across the expectant hush. "My friends," he said, turning slowly to take in the gathered courtiers, "I thank you for your loyalty and your counsel. Today we have secured the Vale's pledge, and soon we hope to do the same with all remaining corners of this realm. May the Seven grant us wisdom and unity. To peace!" The crowd responded with a chorus of agreement, raising cups in unison. Sansa sipped her wine, feeling a gentle warmth spread through her veins. Peace. The word was like a fragile flower in a land that had seen too much bloodshed. She prayed silently that they could nurture it, protect it from the storms that surely lay ahead. When the feast wound down, music still lingering in the air like a pleasant echo, Aegon and Sansa took their leave, retreating from the throng. The castle's hallways felt cooler after the press of bodies in the dining hall. A single sconce flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls. She kept her hand lightly on his arm, savoring the closeness. They spoke little, allowing the quiet to envelop them. At length, they entered their bedchamber, where the lamps had been lit in preparation for their arrival. She removed the pins from her hair, shaking loose the braids until her auburn locks tumbled free. He removed his cloak and doublet, setting them aside with a sigh of relief. Their eyes met in the soft glow, and for once, the tension in his gaze seemed eased. Tonight, they had achieved a measure of success, and the city, though never entirely safe, was calmer than it had been. "I'm proud of you," he murmured, stepping close enough that the warmth of his body radiated against hers. "You navigated those negotiations with grace. The Vale's acceptance is as much your doing as mine." She let her hands rest against the plain linen of his undershirt. "I only followed what my father once taught me. Speak fairly, be firm, and don't promise what you can't deliver. But thank you. I'm proud of us both." His hands found her waist, and he leaned his forehead against hers in a gentle gesture. "May tomorrow bring more progress and fewer surprises," he said softly, though a note of wry humor laced his words. In King's Landing, surprises lurked around every corridor. She tilted her head, brushing her lips across his. "If it doesn't, we'll face them. One step at a time, we'll keep forging this new path." They stood locked in that quiet tenderness for a few moments before extinguishing the lamps. The darkness that enveloped them felt surprisingly comforting, as though it granted them a moment outside the demands of the day. She let herself imagine, just briefly, a future in which they had consolidated the realm's loyalty, in which Daenerys Targaryen arrived, not as a conqueror, but as an ally, in which the small folk no longer starved, and the roads were safe. She imagined children laughing in sunlit courtyards, the legacy of wolf and dragon living in peace. It was a beautiful dream, but she knew it would take more than hope to make it reality. Still, dreams had carried her through darker days. Now she had a chance to see them take shape in the waking world. If she and Aegon remained steadfast, and if fortune favored them. Closing her eyes, she let sleep come, lulled by the sound of his breathing and the distant hush of the city that, for once, seemed to settle into a fragile contentment. Dawn brought another wave of tasks and mysteries. Raven scrolls awaited at the break of day. The reports from the Stormlands promised more complications, hinting at rival banners refusing to acknowledge a Targaryen king. Yet, as Sansa read them, she felt a steely resolve fill her. She had come so far from the naive girl who first arrived in King's Landing, longing for fair-haired princes and glorious feasts. Now, she was forging alliances, steering the realm, and perhaps building something that might outlast the cruelty that once nearly broke her. With that thought, she rose, dressed, and went forth to meet Aegon at the breakfast table, ready once more to shoulder the burdens of the crown. No matter what challenges waited in the days ahead, she would stand beside him, drawing strength from the quiet bond they had begun to share. The seeds of their rule were planted. Only time would tell if they would blossom into the peace she yearned for, or if the storms gathering beyond the horizon would uproot them all. But for now, hope coursed in her veins like a hidden spring, fueling her determination to make this unlikely marriage not just a footnote in history, but a true turning point for the Seven Kingdoms.